There's like the negative manipulation, which is you abuse someone and take it away, and the positive manipulation, which is you give something good and then you take it away, so that now people see, okay, this is much better than the negative manipulation, and basically what's supposed to happen over time is everyone's supposed to realize, okay, the positive situation is really good, and let's go for that. And this does get to this idea of collectively winning the game of life.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Dan Jungleman Cates, you are one of the most legendary poker players of all time, wreaking havoc at the poker table since 2006. You quickly rose to fame, grinding your way to the nosebleed online cash games, where many of today's legends were made in the early 2010s. But really and truly, it was when you took the infamous Durrrr challenge that your stardom really hit another level, facing Tom Durrrr, one who many argued to be the best cash game player ever at the time, in a challenge for $1.5 million over 50,000 high-stakes cash game hands. Durrrr ended up giving up, more or less, after around 20,000 hands, with you being up $1.2 million. And since then, you had many ups and downs at the poker table, taking a hit when Full Tilt closed down or down after Black Friday in 2012, but then obviously grinding yourself all the way back. Today, you are still one of the top pro professional players, winning back-to-back poker player championship bracelets at the WSOP 2021 and 2022. And I believe you were recently in Tallinn just a couple of weeks ago to play the inaugural Bombay Live Club Night that hosted a $10,000 tournament together with our shareholder in Next.io, Tim Heat of YOLO, my friend Albert Clement, and of course another friend, Andrew Nesset, who, by the way, texted me during that night that he was hoping for a soft tournament, only to find himself seated next to Jungleman.
Yeah, really. It was a funny tournament. There were people seemed to have a clue for that thing, which is not what I expected. I thought there was like going to be much less of a clue going on. What I thought, but the people had some kind of like it was not the like softest thing ever. It was pretty soft.
Yeah.
The Durrrr challenge thing was like pretty damn lucky when I think about it.
Yep.
I just happened to be in the right place and happened to find the guy who thought I was bad for some reason and just wildly mistaken. Somehow.
Will it ever be completed, the challenge?
Huh?
Will it ever be completed, the challenge, do you think?
He forfeit. It's completed. How many years
done.
does he get? When can I get paid?
But did you ever get paid?
I did, but it's sort of stupid how things happened. It was very strange how things happened. Basically, no one gave a fuck about from my perspective, a lot of mercy happened, you can say. And a lot of like letting him off things that were really bad for him happened. And a little feeling sorry for him. And he tried to be fair, but, the way things work out in the long run isn't, exactly what's fair. And I don't think it's really resolved. I think it's resolve more or less, in the sense of like, okay, Tom, you have lots of life problems. I'm gonna let you figure out your life, and I'm not gonna like make you pay like a load extra on this when you don't have the money. But I would like to, it seems fair that I should get some kind of penalties. Like I basically decided to renegotiate the penalties, because what I'm pretty sure happened, but I don't know for sure, is that Tom picked the penalties that he wanted. He did definitely at the very start. This definitely happened. It's like, oh, he wanted to pick some penalties that were like kind of crazy, like 15K plus 1K, 5K to 10K every time he missed it for every 2 months or something like that. Well, guess what? After like 4 years, this ends up being like,
that's a lot of interest,
over $1 million or something. I'm like, you know what, Tom, let's not charge that much. And then this process kept continuing. And then at some point, all of a sudden, these penalties are down payments. So you can imagine my rage at that. And I think it's still rightful anger. But I did decide, okay, well, the penalties are still like $800,000. So I thought, well, I guess it makes sense to renegotiate that. I can agree with that. I don't agree that they're down payments. I still don't agree with that. That's all bullshit. I'm wildly, massively sure, and I proved a case pretty much. I don't really know what I should have done differently, other than basically behave like a broken record and pretend like I don't have an anger function. And so that's what I could have done, I guess, if I was like really Mr. Patience Extreme. And yeah, so now Tom has, he's got his own thing going on. He's got his own issues of sorts, and I'm letting him, hoping he figures things out, man. I'm really hoping he figures things out. He figures out whatever his, life issues are. It seemed like for other things would have just worked out, but whatever. And now it's like you kind of get to the point where we'll sum it up, because I don't know if you want to keep talking about this or not. But in summary,
go on.
Well, in summary, I have to re-look at the situation and step back and then say, okay, what's the most logical way of dealing with this to get the best possible outcome, which is really the basis of all my actions, at least to the best of my ability. But more or less, it's to try to help him in the ways of solving his problems, right? He's not, like, I don't really want to attack him. That generally is not useful. It's useful to attack people it's in very few situations where it's actually useful to attack people, but it's usually when they're really being a piece of shit and they're just totally acting out of greed, which, an element of that is there with how he's acted. I think he'll even admit it, even in subtle variations of it. Yeah, it's not, with the challenge, it's not really, I would say that his issues are a little bit more complicated. I don't think that he has the money to like pay a bunch of penalties on top of his other more pressing issues.
Right.
And
you're trying to figure out the GTO play, basically. Right.
Well, the GTO play, when you keep stepping back and considering the metagame, the bigger situation, and all these sorts of things, it's quite complicated when it comes to life. But in general, it tends to have certain overarching themes, as I've noticed, but to apply compassion, but also to be firm as well and not let injustice happen to the best of your ability. And this seems to be a reiterating principle. There are situations in which anger is appropriate, but they're very rare. If you're talking really, really GTO, and it's usually when people are just really taking the piss and just overstepping boundaries kind of thing. But he did overstep boundaries for sure, and more like used as a pattern and dropped. Anyway,
yeah. So Dan, this is very tightly connected with the topic of today, which is GTO strategies for life. And I suppose in these type of situations and in general, what's your thoughts around using the carrot or the stick to solve these type of problems, or is it highly dependent on the situation? It's like the Machiavellian thinking, right? This is better to be good or bad as a leader.
Well, good for sure. I think even Machiavelli seemed kind of suspicious, at least when I was reading The Prince, of using manipulative tactics too much. They seem to not. You seem to say they could be useful. I didn't actually. I should reread that book properly and slowly. I mean, I don't know if he really has all that much to add to my way of thinking. I mean, you should be a bit loved and feared. There needs to be some kind of stick for sure. Let's put it like that. There needs to be some kind of stick, but usually the stick is a little bit too blunt, you might say. And you want to have a stick with lots of capabilities, not just a really big stick. A potentially big stick, yes, but also you don't want to only use the big stick. You want to have a few different sticks. You want to have a small stick. You want to have a little whip. You want to have someone else with a small whip, like that kind of thing. Don't want to just have one mode if things go wrong. It's not the big stick all the time. If we're building on this analogy, and generally speaking, you want to have the carrot too. So, in my view, it really should be. There should be also I forget the term, but there should be a continuous sequence of carrots, right? And there should be various ultimate carrots. A good example might be fitness, actually, in that typically people often think to themselves, "Oh, I want to get the six-pack." Like that's the common goal, right? Let's get the six-pack. And so if you were to get the six-pack immediately, and I've been thinking this to myself as well, you probably wouldn't work out too much if that was your ultimate goal. But guess what? The irony is that one funny thing for getting fit is you actually lose fat first on your face, which is more beneficial than, if you think about it, than getting a six-pack. Like, who really gives a fuck if you have a six-pack? First of all, people see your face all the time, so you'll actually look better. And secondly, if you look at the statistics for how many people actually really have a six-pack, it's really something like 40 out of them. It's some absurdly small percentage, and even less must be a natural one. So it's much more idolized than it should be. It's far easier to become a millionaire, which is far more useful than a fucking six-pack. Not to mention maintaining it. And I don't think people really care that much about it. I don't think it really has a whole lot of utility other than you get like a lot of compliments from the bros who are like, "Damn, bro, good job." I don't really know if it helps you get women, to be honest. I have yet to discover this. I can't help that much because they can't see it a lot of the time, where they can see your personality and whatever you can do and that sort of thing. So as it turns out, it's good to have some things denied, you can say, for the carrot. And you want to give things you want to have, there's a term for this, but I forget what it's called, but you want to have the small versions of stick and small versions of carrot, and to not give them out too much sparingly in either direction. And reality should also work like this as well. This creates a far more, the far better experience to get a random version of positive benefits slowly over time. This is actually optimal for an optimal experience. I'm getting a little bit non sequitur and a bit deep, but this is just truth of how reality works. And incidentally, poker, if you're a winning player, does do this. Or if you're winning, if you're having lots of fun, you're sort of getting this, as long as you don't lose so much that it suddenly hurts you in other ways. Does this answer your question?
Absolutely, Dan. We like to go deep here at the Next Door podcast, and
Right.
as I mentioned, Dan, the topic today, of course, is GTO strategies for life, and your podcast is called "Winning the Game of Life." So, kind of,
Sure.
this implies that it is possible to kind of break down the strategy for living the perfect life. Like, how deep can you go in breaking down life as a game and building what would seem to be the GTO, or the game theory optimal strategy for life? How deep can you go in this game?
This goes very deep. So this goes very deep, and this really bit of a mind fuck for me. I feel like I've reached my mind has more or less reached a consensus of what the form should look like. But it goes far deeper than simply poker or earning some money or even charity. Like, what is winning the game of life? First, we have to define what winning is. And secondly, we have to define, some sort of strategy and like, where are we trying to go and that kind of thing. You can kind of guess where this would end up in short. But the rough thought process of mine was trying to think of where to start. But a big part of it is, okay, it's very much related to my journey through poker, and that the first thing that I really wanted, if I really went back to it, was to be free and to do roughly whatever I wanted. And I think that is one of the first and most important virtues, perhaps the most important virtue. If you really look back at things, then even like all evil, but it's not exactly evil. The guys that say there's no evil are not exactly wrong. I mean, there is and there's not. All bad things are essentially a byproduct of this idea of free will. This is true. I didn't know if you want me to explain this or not, or even necessarily agree. Huh?
No, absolutely. I would say like the concept of evil is quite complex at times, because if you ask the darkest figures of history, say like the Joseph Stalin or the Hitler, they would not see themselves as doing evil. They would see themselves as doing good in their own context, right? And that's where some kind of philosophies would be saying that there isn't any such thing as good or evil. There's just different perspectives, perhaps.
Okay, so yes, but the but is that to stall on that point is wildly unproductive, because here's the bottom line. If you do that, so basically there is evil, and from their perspective, there's not. Sure, fine. But the but is, what do you want? And do you want a situation where like all these things that give you negative or give you pain, they give you pain ultimately end up being created? Or do you not want that? Do you want good experiences? And those sorts of experiences that they did should inevitably continuously give them pain, et cetera, et cetera. And their experiences are necessarily isolated from the rest of the world, right? So this evil is more like taking a different context of, it's just separation from everything else. A really good definition of evil would be something like the more degrees being separated from something else. So you can see this when you apply any kind of concept of extreme evil, and look at how far removed they are from everybody else. Well, how far removed they are from the big picture, I think, is more accurate, because everyone can be stuck in a hive mind, which is what I personally believe is going on, that a huge percent of the world is stuck in a hive mind that is leading them wildly astray, which is to be predicted, actually. But rather to be the more away from the big picture, let's say, the more incongruency there is between how things should work out in the long run. Like, for example, the more dishonorable someone is, the more detached they are from systems of honor. Does that make sense? Do you agree?
Yeah, I would say, you can ask a much deeper question, I think, which is why should we be honest in the first place? A child a 5-year-old will ask this question, why would I be honest when I can lie and get what I want? And it's a quite difficult question, I think, right?
I've asked exactly this question. I have an answer for you. I think the answer is relatively simple, and this also applies to all the natures of all virtues. I think there has to be a logical congruency for all these things. I mean, the same thing in poker, really. The same concept reiterates in poker. You'll lose at poker if you fucking suck. It's basically the same thing. And what is losing? Losing, in a different point of view, is just your. I mean, the idea of a bankroll is a little bit easier to wrap your mind around, but you just do something that's negative EV, and you have like negative EV experiences perpetually and over if you don't focus on the things that make you win. Well, it's really the same sort of thing. Well, what is winning? Winning in this context is having good emotional experiences. And many of those good emotional experiences require some form of short-term gratification, short-term denial of gratification, excuse me, which makes sense. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to break things down, how can you get to certain other experiences, that are harder to reach and they're also good? I mean, if they're going to be good and they have to be ones that most people haven't done, there has to be some kind of barrier. The barrier is turning down some form of short-term gratification in order to reach there, or just having some kind of propensities that other people don't have. But anyway, to answer your question, a lot of systems basically can't exist unless there's honor, right? So if there's no honor, a good example is the situation in Turkey. So in Turkey, there's been quite a large issue of large companies forming because of the fact that people would just basically screw each other over after groups of 30 or whatever it is. So or excuse me, groups larger than 30 just haven't been able to be formed too much because people screw each other over too much. And so that's the reason why large corporations can't fucking exist, because people are screwing each other over too much. And therefore, a lot of experiences are necessarily denied, as well as scalable possibilities, because there's no honor. And you might say, oh, why can't I just cheat the system? Well, you can. And in theory, what's supposed to happen, and in reality, this appears to happen, is eventually someone figures out, okay, well, you're not cooperating with this honor system. Get the fuck out. That's what's supposed to happen. That's actually ethical. Get the fuck out. And that happens in all different kinds of forms. It's even basically the version of that is supposed to happen with all systems where people have to cooperate more and more. Is like people that don't cooperate, their punishment is don't partake. And yeah, a lot of the positive virtues must have this sort of quality of sorts. There's like the negative manipulation, which is you abuse someone and take it away, and the positive manipulation, which is you give something good and then you take it away, so that now people see, okay, this is much better than the negative manipulation, and basically what's supposed to happen over time is everyone's supposed to realize, okay, the positive situation is really good, and let's go for that. And this does get to this idea of collectively winning the game of life, because what you want to do is create a bunch of positively scalable situations or positive things. You want people to cooperate more and more and more, so that now there's no more evil, and now we have the best possible optimal situation. This is a thing. This is a possibility, theoretically speaking. But I personally believe, and there's quite some evidence of this, that the world is going in this direction. And in fact, I can find a video that shows that game theory also supports this as well, and supports this idea of collective cooperation. Going back to this idea of winning at life, this is a bit of a very complicated subject because of the emotional payoffs being different for a lot of different experiences. But generally speaking, a lot of these experiences and the facilitation of a lot of these experiences will require a lot of cooperation. And an overarching principle is you want things to actually go from not really working or not working much at all to collectively working more and more so for oneself and for a group, if that makes sense. That's because your experience will be defined by your previous experiences, right? So if now you reach a higher state of experience, this is a better situation than had you been at a higher state of experience and things dropped, things got worse, or they fluctuated, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think maybe like because you talked earlier in the conversation about thinking almost from first principles, that like the first question maybe is what do you constitute as winning, right? Because we are all individuals, and some individuals will define that in money terms. Otherwise, other people would define it in happiness. Others would define it maybe in procreation or something like that. And I often think about what is it that makes a company like Apple with hundreds of thousands of employees fall in line seemingly without that much protests or disturbance within the company. They are kind of being productive each day, versus how a country is run. Let's say take United States as an example, which has an incredible amount of infighting that leads to a lot of inefficiency. And I think the answer to that is the goal of Apple is very clearly defined. And in any company, that is generally make as much money as possible. And when that goal is formulated, it's much easier to understand what is the GTO strategy to reach that target. Whereas a country's targets or goals are not defined, right? Because the left of the political wing will have certain ideals that they would like to work towards, and the people on the right are working toward other ideals, and it's basically made up of millions of people potentially that have different versions of what that goal is, which leads then to countries generally not having the same efficiency as companies have.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at, there's a bunch of thoughts I had on that. I want to first say that this idea of winning, really like a huge question is, what does success really look like? because you can have this idea of money or procreation, etc. But I would challenge both of those possibilities. I can think of counterexamples. And one big thing for me was at some point I realized, well, optimizing purely for money for all my decisions doesn't really work, especially if I would make more and more money. I have to do something a bit different. But on top of that, well, why optimize for that? Because money is just fairly useless at some point. Unless I'm going to do something with it, then I want to optimize for experience. And I want to, well, what if I want to build my legacy? Then I want to optimize for positive impact, which does go on and scales and lasts, right? So there's that. And then if you look at the idea of procreation, you could say, oh, yeah, you should reproduce as much as possible. Not exactly, because you'll be sacrificing quite a lot to do so. This will bend systems quite a lot and cause loads of pain. Actually, you'll definitely undermine the idea of making positive impact by trying to procreate as much as possible. Matter of fact, long story short, monogamy appears to be optimal for long-term positive impact and possibly happiness as well. It's one of the situations where if you have loads of partners, you don't have time for all of them, and then you preclude yourself from having whatever deep relationships possible. So, yeah, I think that even the answer is more complicated, where you have to really decide what is this end goal that you're aiming for, which is personally what I asked a lot. And I think what you alluded to about the integrity of the system is actually an important point to making things really happen, to achieving the actual goal. I just challenge that the goal is necessarily GTO, but to actually achieve the goal, what you're getting at reminds me a lot of the nature of the Christian church and the Roman Empire, at least at certain times. The Roman Empire had some issues, to say the least. But what happened was basically, actually, a major part of the Roman Empire's ultimate downfall was it screwing over the Christians, the early Christians, who adopted the systems of Rome, the infrastructures of Rome, in order to become so successful. And a big reason why the Christian church became so successful as a duality of their stubborn systems was the fact that they had stubborn systems. They had a load of integrity to them. And so they were able to accomplish their goals very, very efficiently. I just think that they missed the mark a little bit, but that's like the opposite end of the fact that a lot of their systems were not really right. But on the opposite end is what you're saying is they did accomplish their fucking goal, which was spreading it far and wide and making like Christianity a fucking thing in a lot of countries. And that's like a major reason for Christianity's success. So I think what your idea of like Apple being really coordinated system and that's what got it to be very successful probably makes loads of sense. I don't know a whole lot about Apple and the current divides in America are kind of screwing it over, which makes lots of sense too. But I wouldn't be able to say that that's for sure the case. I just happen to know a little bit about Christianity's success. I can't say I know everything out there. There's lots of stuff out there, as it turns out. But this is it's more the realm of my interests. I've personally decided that it appears that the ultimate goal is none of these things based off of my own inferences. They look like basically a little bit of traps, and everything's a little bit of a trap, except for certain things. Except for like doing things for a certain place, I should say. And yeah, so I've been pursuing all that and not caring so much exactly how much money I'm making lately.
Yeah, I like it, Anna. I want to bring the conversation back into poker a little bit again. So,
Okay.
I always thought about poker as a bit of a microcosm for life in many ways. At the poker table, there are many important life lessons. It's almost like a speed run of life. But the way the game of poker is set up is such that you cannot be honest all the time, right? It's
Sure.
In the game of life, perhaps the noble path is to try to be honest at your own detriment at times for that longer term goal. But that is definitely not true in poker. And I always say, whenever I have kids someday, I would love to play poker with them because there's so many lessons in playing poker, and everything from psychology to money management, learning mathematics, odds, and so on and so forth. And so I want to pass that question over to you, Dan. What have you learned about life from the game of poker?
I would say that the nature between bluffing and not bluffing with poker is more appropriate to relate to life between these angles of greed and not having greed, meaning that there should be some kind of balance between, well, what the balance being fairness, justice, whatever you want to say, fairness and justice, basically the same thing. That between like what someone deserves and what other people deserves, and that will create the most harmony. Once that's the most efficient situation. That's like kind of like GTO, right? There's a GTO between bluffs and value. There's a GTO between, and bluff is kind of like to try to take, right? If you bluff too much and you try to take, guess what? The system pushes back at you eventually in some form or another. And there's swings associated with that. I mean, the same is true in real life. The more you try to take, if you take too much, you may succeed, but eventually the system will push back at you at some point. At least that's what's supposed to happen in theory. It's really hard to prove, period, but you see dualities play out a lot naturally. The Buddha said this precisely. He said, if you do evil, you may try to run from it, but it will find you. I mean, I don't know if that's universally true or not. GTO says it's true, presuming enough times there. And the have too much value is kind of the other way. You kind of like let people like have more of the whatever sort of situation. But if you do decide to take what's rightfully yours, like eventually you actually take a bit more at some point. If you do finally realize, oh yeah, maybe I should bluff a bit more. And there's an adjustment to the system or the system will have to readjust according to that. And then there's a GTO once these balances are in play. It's like kind of like yin and yang would be a good analogy for that. So it doesn't have so much to do with lying, in my opinion, just take and give and the balancing between. I've learned a lot of that lessons. One thing I learned was the practice of humility. I actually learned the EV of kindness. I learned the EV. I learned a lot of things indirectly through poker. I learned some politic type things as well. I learned, because poker often has some form of politics, it's kind of like lessons in politics, I'd say. If you have to provide some kind of value and you have to think of ways to do it, and you have to understand how people operate if you're trying to get into the games. Like, as you get better at poker, you now have to get better at dealing with people, the people that run the games. Let's see, what else did I learn? Learn to be equanimous. That's another thing, to be at peace with everything. I learned to persevere, that's for sure. I learned that a lot of the downswings, etc., were a bit of an illusion, as well as the upswings. I thought I was on top of the world at times, and I wasn't. And I thought I was at the bottom of the world at times, and I wasn't, fortunately. It seemed like the future was not so dependent on my cocky interpretation or a solemn interpretation. What else? I learned patience a fair bit. I learned this idea of applying symbolic reasoning beyond just this is something that's more unique to me, that symbolic reasoning of where your edge is at first, and looking in various different directions. And then for me, it finally transcended simply where my edge was at, like on the table between the individual hands I played. If all of a sudden kindness became an edge, if you see what I'm saying, and then to be kind to everyone became an edge, and I'm realizing, oh, okay, I'm seeing a bit of a principle here. And it seemed like, at some point, like I had the behavior that I got really upset when I lost, and then I saw over time that this punished me, and then all of a sudden it became an edge to change that. Do you see what I'm saying? So slowly my negative strategies, my negative ways of dealing with things became kind of undermined by me experientially seeing that they were minus EV. And this kind of built up ultimately to other things going on in my life that made me see you can say, the real solution for winning in the game of life and a new life purpose.
Yeah. I think, to some extent, what you're talking about is like how quickly you pick up on these lessons by playing poker. These are like quite fundamental, deep lessons of life, because when you sit down at the poker table, especially if you play a nosebleed game for a lot of money, it's very, very difficult to hide your true emotions in that moment. And around the poker table, you'll have players that are more or less risk averse, and you get to know them on a very intimate basis when they are faced with these really big decisions that can potentially change their life in money terms, at least. And I wanted to talk about this, that as well, in terms of mental fortitude. I mean, then I remember in the early 2010s when the nosebleed games just became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in single nights, the top pros on those tables would win or lose, most of their bankroll. And how on earth were you able to go into those games knowing the risk that you were taking, playing those like incredibly high stakes game? And how has your mental fortitude developed over the years?
Well, it didn't happen overnight. And so it happened in steps, right? It's, if you do things that look a little bit hard, they become easier. If you do things a little harder, they become easier. And slowly your overturn window changes over time. And what is difficult? Difficult is only defined from what's relative, right? And you just keep pushing yourself. And at some point, if you continuously push yourself, you're at soaring heights. It's what matters. What matters then is what matters is specifically the impetus that leads to that, which is called courage. That's the name for it, of that virtue, one of the virtues that I personally champion, and also to prefer to promote and try to get people to see that it goes beyond just money, because it does. It's the same fucking thing, except now it goes to other areas of life, such as making a social difference or social impact. And poker is really good for showing you how it works, and there's all kind of different angles to push it, such as running a bluff or making a hero call, and that kind of thing. And this is really leads to X impact in the real world. I think that's pretty self-evident to figure out if you really think about things. And as far as making money in poker, I mean, obviously your bankroll strategies and discipline and that kind of thing matters too. The most important thing is courage. I mean, actually, the most important thing is what I call insight and being able to see the truth. That's the most important thing, parsing truth from falsehood and finding objective reality towards what you want. And to play these super high stakes, you just keep pushing yourself, and then all of a sudden you're playing high stakes. And at some point in the middle of all this, I realized, well, wait a minute, what am I? And I realized that this is just in my nature to keep playing higher and higher stakes. And at some point, I realized finally how it would transcend from even money for me. And that was a big realization for me personally. And it doesn't just apply to poker, it applies to anything. For me personally, it's also been applying in other directions as well, like fitness and building my career and building business. And it's given me confidence to do a lot of these different things beyond that. It could probably, you probably used it even for building your podcast and things like that. It must have started small, right? Something must have started small. It's the same thing.
Of course. I think it has to be that kind of innate ability, perhaps, to be able to risk it all, right? And some people have that in them and some people don't. It's very difficult to train that, I think, right? When you play against a poker player who is known for being very tight as a poker player, they're probably not going to fundamentally change into a loose player, right? It's like an innate trait in their personality that decides whether they are tight or whether they are loose as a player.
I oscillated between those tendencies at the poker table, but to answer your question, what is it? I mean, I would ask the question, what is it all? And it all has to be truly risk it all. You have to have the worthy cause to do it. Otherwise, it's not a good idea to risk it all. As far as we're talking about on the poker table, risking it all is usually not a good idea. You can risk all the money in front of you, but it shouldn't be all of your money. Then you're doing something wrong. That means that your bankroll management is bad and that you're doing some things that are stupid. I would not advocate that. I would advocate having, 20 buy-in plus of something, at least if it's a soft game, or more, 50 buy-ins, as they say, as countless sites have said. And if you can't risk a buy-in out of your 50 buy-ins at taking a shot, then that's also a problem. I would say then, your life's not really going to change if you lose 2.5% of your net worth. That's a you thing. But if it's 100% of your net worth, then probably should reconsider how much money you're putting on the table, man.
Yeah. Because in life, if we take this strategy to life, those who are willing to go to extreme length of risking it all, so to say, are very difficult to negotiate against, right? Like you don't want to go head to head with a person in a confrontation, for example, who is willing to put their life on the line. And if you know that, you're not going to enter that altercation. The same, if we take a bigger perspective, this is the nuclear deterrent, right? The fact that multiple nations have nuclear weapons, and therefore they are unwilling to confront each other because the stakes are incredibly high, and posturing becomes very important for these superpowers to make sure to let the other adversary know that we are willing and prepared and able and looking forward perhaps to use nuclear weapons, because that acts as a deterrent not to go into that negotiation in the first place.
Yeah, that's my thing, is nuclear war. That's kind of into that. No, yeah, well, that's true. But I mean, there's all kinds of examples at smaller scale where risking it all the time is a pretty shitty strategy. I mean, the simple example for gambling would be the martingale strategy. You could risk it all.
Exactly.
Keep martingaling until you're broke, and you'll win.
You win most of the time. Yeah, you win most of the time. But when you lose everything.
You lose it all. That's how that works, right? Or if you're the guy that in every conflict is like, you know what, motherfucker, let's fucking go. I'm ready to go until I'm dead. Well, guess what? At some point, most people will be like, you know what, all right, you got this, you win.
Yeah.
And then one time there'll be a guy that's like, okay, fine, let's fucking do it. And then then you're dead. So that's my way of looking at things for that. It's just another strategy that's just being implemented at scale. And then you have to like think to yourself, okay, what's the optimal strategy? It was effectively what I asked the question for. And I mean, I personally think I've found more or less the theme of the optimal strategy for life. Actually, the theme being the main words, but to put it into practice is extremely complicated. That's a lot more complicated, and I mean, it's going to differ for person, but a big part really is just cipher through which things matter a lot. Yeah, I mean, I thought through things philosophically, and I'm like, it's appear to be going more and more in this direction. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. No, so essentially, to summarize the point, is kind of like most people, when they are presented with the martingale theory of roulette, they think that this sounds like a good strategy, right? If I cover all the numbers except for one, I'm going to win almost every time, and it's very unlikely that I'll lose, or if I double the bet each time. If I double the bet each time, eventually I'm gonna win, right? And there's some fallacies in there, right? Number one is you don't have unlimited amount of money, so at some point, you can't double your bet anymore. The second fallacy is that people believe that luck has a memory, right? So if red has been placed 5 times in a row, it's less likely that red is gonna hit next time. People have a tendency to find patterns, and
do they?
And they believe that luck has memory. I think most people think that luck has a memory, but this is what
survey on that.
This,
lighting.
Yeah, okay, yeah. This is my own survey from the people around me. Let's say not very scientific, perhaps, but
okay.
I do believe that poker players especially understands equity and variance to a much greater extent than almost anyone.
Sure.
Right? And so a poker player will see that the martingale strategy, yes, it will work most of the time, but as you point out, the time that it doesn't work, that's when it all falls apart, and it actually falls back to the standard odds of roulette if you play that scenario out a million times. And similarly, in the example of the nuclear deterrence strategy, similar to martingale, that yes, it will work most of the time, but the time it doesn't, the world goes under. So actually, it is potentially a minus EV strategy.
Well, is that the nation's strategy? Like every time there's a conflict, hey, guess what? I got a lot of nukes and I'm ready to use them. And is that the strategy? I don't know really the summation of nuclear strategy. I do know that nuclear war was averted a couple times, or once or twice, by some brave people that mostly aren't really known even by myself. I know that's happened, though. Too bad. I don't know how that's happened, but there's at least one person I know that saved the world by not pressing the button somehow. Yeah, I don't know much more than that. I'd have to look up what the guy's name is. It's some Russian guy.
Yeah, that's in the classic news and stuff. I mean, a time when war definitely was avoided was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the U.S. were prepared to invade Cuba at that time, which most likely would have sparked a nuclear war. And because of that threat, John F. Kennedy, against his general's recommendations, decided to create a blockade instead. And then ultimately, Gorbachev and those guys, they decided to remove the warheads from Cuba to lower the temperature, and that was a direct consequence of the potential consequence of nuclear war. So at that time, it definitely worked. But again, it will work most of the time. But it's just that when you put all the chips on the table, the time it doesn't work, you're out of the tournament. The world is over.
Well, it has to be worth it to put all the chips on the table. There are times where it's worth it too.
True. Yeah. It's just a question what that EV is, which is, I guess, the part of the formula that doesn't really exist today. We don't know to what extent we're willing to thwart a nuclear war because we haven't run the experiment at all, basically. That's the unknown factor.
Yeah, I haven't figured that one out. The nuclear war sims. I don't know where those ones are at.
For sure. So, Dan, I want to also switch a little bit subject to stay on poker for a bit more. Within the Next.io community, we had a bit of a debate a while ago around bots playing GTO poker online in the day and age climate. So, in online poker, I would love for you as an expert to talk a little bit about if you see bots playing GTO, playing perfect poker, as a threat to online poker, or how do you view kind of bots becoming better and better and eventually surpassing human beings?
That's a good question. I don't think bots should play online poker, first of all. So we'll start with that. Why are we playing against bots exactly? I wonder if there's a solution where this can make sense. I think there isn't. But yeah, I don't think so. I think for the time being, they should be banned. It would be interesting if they can be allowed. I'm pretty sure there's maybe in some kind of context they're allowed, like bot versus bot battles, Terminator battles. That could be interesting. Yeah,
like Robot Wars.
So I would say that their bots existing is just inevitable, and that's probably what we should do is use some anti-bot bots to catch them. That's what my opinion is on that. They don't really threaten the existence of poker. It would be too hard to really end poker. It would just change form. I think they force some pressing issues, though. I think they also do some things that make people uncomfortable, but are inevitable, that people don't realize are part of their dualities of the way that they've lived. Just simply that philosophically, people can't be comfortable forever. There's no such thing. I believe is the answer for that. Just because comfort is an opposite end of another duality, which is whatever things were given in the first place in order to achieve that level of comfort. I just don't think people think of things that way. So I don't think it really threatens it, but it does pushes the barriers a little bit. I believe that actually AI is a byproduct of a lot of certain characteristics that people didn't realize they had, so they're indirectly responsible in a certain kind of way. Does that make some kind of sense to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
So, for example, to give you an example, the people's tendency to try to get better and to make things easy will lead to the creation of AI through other people who have the similar sorts of tendencies, or there'll be certain kinds of things that people do that are not that far away from creating an AI to make themselves comfortable. Maybe it's arguable that people use AI in their everyday lives, for example. That's what I mean, is that it's not that unlinked between AI actually going and beating poker.
Okay. Are there, though, bots that are able to play GTO in real time today?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know how good they are. I have not really messed with that. They really should look at it. I haven't really tried to find the ultimate GTO bots. I know that there's ones that can make the perfect play and are pretty much the perfect play. Like, why can't they then do it? Like, that seems like an easy jump to make.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting one because I just like extrapolate this a bit. Like, the top professionals today are investing an enormous amount of mental energy in order to memorize different situations and play poker in heuristics terms, right? In order to try to play something that is close to DTO, but it takes an enormous amount of brain power to try to memorize that amount of possible outcomes in poker, right? Whereas if they could just plug in a bot that could do it for them, and even better, of course, you would think that most poker players would take that second alternative.
Well, if we're really taking shortcuts, although what point are we using playing a sport, right? What point are we? What is a sport? A sport is where we do stuff and we compete against each other. I'm pretty sure that's what a sport is. So at what point, or what's the nature of the sport that we're playing, or game, or whatever you want to call it, right? So if you have a bot that does everything for you, and that's not the nature of the game. We have a word for this. It's called cheating. That's what cheating is. So in contexts where people are doing that, or having a bot do everything for them, it's a bot battle. It's a bot fight, right? This seems like a fair game.
Fair enough. Dan, sorry to wrap things up today. Just a final question for you here. What's next for Jungleman? What are you spending time on right now outside of playing poker, and what is next for Jungleman?
Well, I've decided, in order to align my crazy aspirations to reality, to do something pretty damn hard. I'll start with that. So the goal with that is to create a poker community where I see one of the things that podcasting myself has given me, and I'm thankful for this. This is one, maybe even a more valuable thing than money, is a bit of a view of the whole picture of the poker economy and like really what's going on. This is a lot my goal to provide and to find out and to see what can be fixed in order to make the situation better for everyone and to make a greater than zero sum game fucking hard for sure, but inspiring. And so I need to figure out, how do we make things beneficial for these VIPs? And I want to create a community that allows for many poker players to be free and be able to pursue their passions. That's a big thing of mine, which I think will do a lot of positive things, such as balance the economy a little bit. I think that having poker be proliferate as a sport, or whatever game you want to say, is definitely positive, even if people lose. And that's the biggest thing that I'm working on currently, and to figure out what things I've got to do to make that happen. And so this is not just poker coaching, but it's also a lot of just creating systems that are going to do this. So one of the steps I've begun to take is starting to write, and hopefully influence the right kind of people to make these steps with me. So that's my biggest focus currently. Also, I'm also planning on learning about some martial arts and be able to preparing to kick some ass. Let's put it that way.
Oh, really? What martial arts are you into?
I have been doing some kung fu. It's quite, it's like another planet from jiu-jitsu, which I think is a bit more practical. I think jiu-jitsu, I think I was like made for jiu-jitsu, actually. It's max, might have the right body type. It's proficient, and it's max
flexible.
mercy and intelligence. Those are important. I think, well, I've definitely got max mercy. I think I'm sure stupid sometimes, but I think I'm mostly smart in certain ways. And yeah, so those, I heard Tai Chi is really, really good for meditation, things like that, but I've yet to meet a Tai Chi master. I met one in Dubai, but I'm trying to learn the different sports different martial arts as I travel.
That's brilliant. Well, Dan, I wish you all the best of luck in these ventures. It's been a really insightful conversation, and a pleasure for me, having followed you for the better part of 15 years, to finally have a conversation with you. So I really thank you for that, and wish you all the best of luck.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience too. I know I've been a little bit difficult, but I appreciate that.
Absolutely pleasure, my friend. Take care.
You too.